The storm raged outside, battering the brittle windows of Emma Turner's apartment. Rain streamed down in streaks, creating shadows that looked like claw marks on the walls. She sat curled up in the corner, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her grandmother's locket. The small, tarnished trinket was heavier than it should have been, as if it carried the weight of every mistake Emma had ever made. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the whispers she had heard at the hollow lantern. The locals' voices had been low and tight, as if saying the words aloud might invite something they weren't ready to face. The midnight train, they called it. It'll come for you if you want it bad enough. But it doesn't just take you somewhere, it takes everything from you in return. Emma had laughed it off at first. A ghost story, she thought. A relic of small-town folklore meant to scare children. But tonight, as the storm clawed at her window, she wasn't laughing. She was clutching the locket like it might burn her. She hadn't laughed much in months. Her life had unraveled in ways she couldn't piece back together. The promotion she had worked for years to achieve had gone to someone younger and savvier. Her husband, once the love of her life, had left her for someone who didn't carry the baggage of regret. And her sister. She hadn't spoken to Emma since the day Emma pawned their grandmother's locket for rent money. It had taken years to buy the locket back, and even now, as she held it, all she could feel was guilt. But wasn't guilt what the train thrived on? At 3:15 a.m., Emma stood at the edge of the town's abandoned train station. It hadn't seen use in decades, and it showed. The platform was cracked, weeds pushing through the stone like skeletal hands clawing at the surface. The air was cold, enough to bite, and the wind howled, carrying faint whispers that Emma couldn't quite decipher. She almost turned back, but as the hour crept toward 3:33 a.m., a sound rose from the darkness, a low, mournful whistle, so deep it felt like it was coming from the earth itself. Emma froze. The air seemed to compress around her, heavy and thick, making it hard to breathe. A rush of wind tore through the station, and before her eyes, the midnight train emerged. It didn't pull in like an ordinary train. It materialized, the shadows coalescing into its massive frame. The engine was a hulking beast of iron and obsidian, its surface alive with writhing veins of green light. The windows glowed faintly, revealing passengers inside, though their faces were blurred, as if smeared across the glass. The train screeched to a halt, and the door in front of her hissed open. The scent of rust, sulfur, and something sickly sweet trotting flowers drifted out. Emma stepped forward. Inside, the air was thick, almost humid, with a faint electrical buzz. The floor beneath her feet was a patchwork of rotting wood and sleek metal. The train's interior stretched far beyond what seemed possible, disappearing into an infinite corridor of doors. Each door was different, some ornate, others plain, but all radiated an aura that made her skin crawl. Emma's breath hitched when a voice spoke from the shadows. "Ticket, please." The conductor stepped into view. He was impossibly tall, his figure wrapped in a tattered black uniform. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes, burning red coals, pierced the darkness. He held out a gloved hand. Emma fumbled, her fingers trembling, and handed him the locket. He examined it closely, his head tilting unnaturally, and then slipped it into his coat. "This will suffice," he said, his voice grating like rusted metal on stone. "Take your seat." As the train began to move, the world outside the windows shifted. It wasn't the town Emma knew, or even anything earthly. The train passed through surreal landscapes, a forest of trees with human faces, their mouths open in silent screams. An ocean of black water where pale hands clawed at the surface. A city suspended upside down in a starless sky. Each stop was worse than the last. At the first, the doors opened to her childhood home. She saw her parents arguing in the kitchen, while her younger self hid beneath the dining table. She remembered this day clearly. It was the day her father left. But the scene outside was wrong. Her parents' faces were pale and waxy. Their movements jerky like marionettes, and her younger self. She wasn't hiding. She was staring directly at Emma, her eyes hollow and accusing. "You let it happen," the conductor murmured, appearing at her side. Emma turned away, her stomach churning. The next stop was worse, a hospital room. Her grandmother lay on the bed, frail and struggling to breathe. Emma had been there, but she'd been too busy scrolling on her phone to notice when her grandmother's hand reached out for hers. Outside the window, the scene replayed, but the sounds were amplified. The beeping heart monitor, the shallow gasps, the flat line. Emma clutched her chest. "I didn't know it was her last moment." "You knew," the conductor said, his shadow engulfing her, "and you chose to look away." The train moved faster now, the windows blurring. Emma stumbled into the next car, a hall of mirrors. Each one reflected a different version of her. Some were grotesque, her face twisted, her body skeletal, her eyes empty sockets. Others were painfully beautiful, showing a version of her life where everything had gone right. She lingered at one mirror, staring at the woman she could have been, a version of herself that had made all the right choices. She looked happy, glowing, with her grandmother's locket around her neck. "I want to be her," Emma whispered, reaching for the glass. "You can't," the conductor hissed, his voice sharp and cold. "That life was never yours, and now, neither is this one." The mirror cracked, and Emma screamed as the train shuddered to a halt. The final stop was a void. The doors opened to reveal a chasm of blackness, the air thick with the stench of sulfur. Shadowy figures writhed below, their faces contorted in agony. "This is where your desires have led you," the conductor said. "The train doesn't grant wishes. It takes you to the truth." As Emma stepped back, the train tilted, and she was thrown forward. She grabbed the doorframe, clinging for dear life, but the conductor's gloved hand pushed her. "You summoned us," he growled, "and now you belong to the midnight train." Her screams were swallowed by the void as the train disappeared, leaving nothing behind but silence. Thanks for watching, and subscribe my channel.